somewhere, in a world one decision away from ours, Rome never fell. And you are still living in its shadow. Rome did not die in a single night. It bled out over centuries, weakened by plagues, corrupted by civil wars, hollowed out by economic collapse until in 476 AD, a boy emperor named Romulus Augustulus was quietly deposed by a Germanic warlord. No great battle, just a tired empire exhaling its last breath. But history is built on hinges, and Rome had dozens of them. Take the crisis of the 3rd century, that 50-year nightmare when dozens of rival emperors rose and fell in bloody succession, while the currency collapsed into worthless scraps. Rome survived, barely through brutal reform. But what if that reform had gone further, finally solving the one flaw Rome never fixed? Succession. Unlike a monarchy with clear inheritance or a republic with elections, Rome ran on a violent lottery, decided by assassination and civil war. A stable succession law could have ended the cycle that drained Roman blood for centuries. Now imagine Constantine going one step further than moving the capital east. What if, instead of a slow east-west split that hardened into two rival empires, he built a true federal system? Co-emperors bound by law, sharing Egypt's grain, Anatolia's soldiers, and Syria's trade, rather than starving the West while feeding Constantinople. The West fell partly because it was cut off from the empire's wealth, and then there are the so-called barbarians. The Goths, who crossed the Danube in 376 AD, were refugees fleeing the Huns, begging Rome for asylum. Rome said yes, then betrayed them, and the refugees eventually killed a Roman emperor at Adrianople. Rome's real superpower was never its army. It was its gift for making outsiders want to become Roman. What if that gift had never failed? Add one more piece. A currency so debased that a silver coin held almost no silver. Wealthy landowners retreating into self-sufficient estates, quietly inventing feudalism before feudalism had a name. What if Rome had built something like real banking, centuries before the Medici, giving the empire the financial spine to survive its crises? Every cause of Rome's death was a choice or a failure to choose. Change 2 or 3 of these dominoes, and the empire that shaped Western civilization might still be standing today. In this timeline, Rome survives the 5th century. East and West stay bound under a reformed dual emperor system. The Germanic migrations that shattered the real Western Empire are instead absorbed tribe by tribe into Roman society. By the 6th century, this Rome looks different, but is unmistakably still Rome. Its succession finally solved through a formal council of governors and commanders. Here is the real turning point. In our history, Rome's fall triggered the Dark Ages, 500 years of fragmentation and lost knowledge. In this timeline, that collapse never happens. The roads stay maintained, the aqueducts keep flowing, the legal system keeps evolving instead of shattering into 1,000 local customs. The Arab conquests of the 7th century still come, but they meet a unified Rome commanding Britain to Mesopotamia, deep reserves that let it hold Egypt and the Levant far longer, settling into an uneasy, negotiated frontier instead of collapse. Western Europe never fractures into the kingdoms we know. No France, because the Franks are Roman soldiers, not founders of their own crown. No Anglo-Saxon England, because Britain stays a defended province instead of being abandoned in 410 AD. No Visigothic Spain, because Hispania remains a wealthy Roman province. Left uninterrupted, how far does this civilization travel? Rome already had underfloor heating, self-sealing concrete, and public libraries. Some historians argue it could reach the printing press, ocean-crossing ships, even early industrial processes centuries ahead of schedule, without a dark age forcing the rediscovery of its own lost knowledge. Religion evolves differently too. Without a collapsed West leaving a power vacuum, the Bishop of Rome never becomes the political ruler the papacy became in our history. And centuries of war between kings and popes simply never happen. By the year 1000, one continuous empire stretches from the Atlantic to Mesopotamia, still Roman in law, language, and memory. By the 13th century, this Rome faces an enemy its founders never imagined: the Mongols. An eternal Rome, still holding Anatolia, Syria, and the Balkans, sits directly in their path. The Mongols historically struggled against fortified, centrally organized states. So does 1,000 more years of Roman siege engineering make this empire the wall that finally stops them? Then comes the Black Death. It does not vanish here. Roman roads might even spread it faster, but Rome's aqueducts, sewers, and unbroken medical tradition could blunt its impact far more than the cramped cities of medieval Europe ever managed. Now consider the printing press, history's single most transformative invention. In our world, it arrived around 1440 and triggered the Reformation and the Scientific Revolution. Here, with unbroken literacy and a 1,000-year head start, it plausibly arrives by the year 900. The acceleration this triggers in medicine, law, and philosophy is almost impossible to overstate. Does the Renaissance still happen? In our history, it was partly a rediscovery of lost knowledge. Here, nothing was ever lost. So you might see a continuous flowering of Roman art and science, reaching Renaissance-level sophistication by the year 800. Naval technology tells a similar story. 1,000 extra years of engineering, paired with the compass and better rigging, could put Roman ships across the Atlantic centuries before 1492. What happens if Rome reaches the Americas around the year 1000 instead? Indigenous civilizations face a single empire with a genuine, if brutal, tradition of absorbing conquered peoples into citizenship, rather than the devastation of the actual Spanish conquest. Not necessarily kinder, but almost certainly different. By the 1500s, this Rome stands as a continuous 3,000-year civilization that absorbed the Mongols, survived plague, and reached new continents before Europe ever built the ships to compete. Every empire eventually collides with its own citizens' hunger for a voice. By what we'd call the 1600s, this Rome has existed unbroken for 2,000 years. But it began as a republic, and that memory never fully dies. Once printed philosophy starts producing thinkers, an uncomfortable question resurfaces. If Rome's own history includes a republic, why does an emperor still sit alone at the top? Perhaps the empire quietly evolves its own constitutional monarchy, a revived senate checking imperial power. Or perhaps it's violent, a Roman equivalent of the French Revolution, a republic reborn from an empire grown too distant from its provinces. Now picture this empire's industrial revolution. Roman engineers already understood water wheels and gear systems, and even toyed with a steam-spinning curiosity called the Eolipile, treated as a toy in our history. Give that idea 1,000 more years and genuine steam power could arrive centuries before James Watt. An early industrial Rome rewrites the map. Instead of European nations racing to colonize Africa, Asia, and the Americas, a single continuous empire may already occupy much of that territory, absorbed gradually rather than seized in a frantic scramble. Though Roman history offers reasons for both hope and unease. A real tradition of citizenship alongside a real, unbroken tradition of slavery that a longer lifespan does not automatically cure. And what of language? In our history, Latin fractured into Italian, French, Spanish, and Romanian precisely because political unity collapsed. In a continuously governed Rome, Latin may remain one living, evolving language from Britain to Mesopotamia, carrying regional accents rather than splitting into separate nations. By what we'd call the 20th century, this Rome is almost unrecognizable next to Augustus's empire, yet still unmistakably continuous with it, never forced to rebuild from zero. What does a world war look like when one side is a single empire that has already existed for 2,500 years? Our 20th century was defined by empires collapsing under nationalism, the idea that every people deserves its own nation. But Rome's model was the opposite. Diverse peoples unified under one law while keeping their own customs. If that model survived this long, does nationalism even take root? Or do Roman provinces instead resemble the federal states of a modern nation? Without Europe fragmenting into competing nations, there is no Britain, France, or Germany to rival for colonies. The great rivalries of this age might instead run between Rome and other continuous ancient powers, an unfractured China, or an Islamic caliphate that never split into pieces. Does Rome's head start compound forever? Probably not evenly. Early advantages like steam power and navigation compound quickly, but breakthroughs like electricity and atomic theory required very specific conceptual leaps a longer history doesn't automatically produce faster. So this Rome likely enters a modern age centuries ahead in engineering, closer to our own timeline in physics and computing. What we're left with is not our world with Rome bolted on top, but something else entirely. No Dark Ages, no nation-states born from feudal fragments, no colonial scramble. A handful of ancient, continuous civilizations dividing the planet. Their laws and languages tracing an unbroken line back thousands of years. Their borders shaped by millennia of negotiation rather than 20th century treaties. But is it even realistic for one empire to survive this long, unbroken? China is our closest real example, enduring for millennia not as one government, but as a resilient template, shared writing, shared bureaucracy, inherited again and again by new dynasties. An eternal Rome likely survives the same way, through law, language, and citizenship reclaimed after several more near collapses along the way, not one unbroken line of emperors. And we shouldn't romanticize it. Real Roman citizenship still coexisted with slavery and conquest, and there's no guarantee a longer life makes an empire kinder, only different. This is where the thought experiment becomes more than speculation. Imagining Rome surviving tells us, by contrast, exactly what was lost when it fell. Interrupted science, a fractured legal system, infrastructure Europe wouldn't match again for 1,000 years. But here's the complication historians always raise. The Dark Ages weren't as uniformly bleak as the name suggests. Monasteries preserved classical texts, agricultural innovation improved food production, and Germanic kingdoms quietly laid groundwork for modern parliamentary government. Rome's fall wasn't only loss, it was also transformation. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Would an eternal Rome actually have been better for human progress, or would its very stability become a burden? Rome's collapse forced hundreds of competing kingdoms to experiment constantly in government, banking, and science, precisely because none of them had Rome's luxury of comfortable continuity. Some call this the fragmentation advantage. Political chaos, for all its cost, can outproduce a single stable empire, because a bad idea dies in one kingdom while a good one survives in the next. Whereas a unified empire can suppress a dangerous new idea everywhere at once. So the honest conclusion isn't that an eternal Rome would be simply better or worse. It's that no government truly lasts forever, not even this one. What survives is never a government, it's a template. And here's the answer hiding in plain sight. 1,500 years after the last Western emperor lost his throne without a fight, we still speak languages descended from Latin. We are still governed by legal systems tracing back to Roman juris. We still build our roads and courts on principles Roman engineers laid down 2,000 years ago. In that sense, Rome never actually fell, not completely. Its government collapsed, but the deeper template survived, resurfacing in the Renaissance's rediscovery of classical texts, in the Enlightenment's obsession with republics, in the languages hundreds of millions still speak without ever thinking about where they came from. So maybe the real question isn't what if Rome never fell. Maybe it's whether Rome ever really fell at all, or simply scattered into the foundations of the world we live in now, so deeply woven in that its absence is almost impossible to notice. The eagle never stopped flying. It just became invisible.